We all have stories, every single one of us. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, we all have stories. Exploring the world for the greatest stories of all time.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show.
The Aron O'Dowd Show. Our soul is the screen upon which we project our dreams. What's your story?
Hello everybody, welcome to the Aron O'Dowd Show. This is a bonus feature of today. We've had one amazing interview. We're about to have another amazing interview. You know, we kind of get lucky with our life where we take things for granted and life throws us a couple of curveballs where, we could end up in the street or we could end up in a place where we didn't imagine. But yet, Source and the Lord gives us amazing gifts and times. And my guest today has influenced his own life, being on the streets, being in government, helping people's health, wealth, and being them true they are. My guest is Courtney Brown. And hello, and welcome to the show, Tony. How are you doing?
Hello, Aaron. Pleased to see you.
Pleased to see you too. What makes you special, Tony?
That's an interesting question. Special. Could be positive or negative.
Let's flip a coin and see where it lands.
Right. Well, I'll take the positive to start with.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very fortunate in having had a lot of quite challenging things and also some very good things happen to me. And I've been very lucky to have come through some of the bad things that have happened and out the other end. And I think that has made me both lucky and resilient and able to help other people in similar situations as a result.
Tell us more about those moments that have made you the incredible being that you are.
A lot of this I didn't have much control over, so some of it starts with birth. And I came along at an inconvenient time when my father was still at university in Nottingham, and my mother was a student nurse in Northampton living in a bedsit. And that's when I came along and decided to be born. Now, it was quite difficult in those days because my mother was trying to go to work every day and also look after me. As a nurse, she was doing 12-hour shifts. Now, what she used to do was put records on the old gramophones that we used to have in those days. She'd pile them up. And apparently I liked music and I'd be quite happy while the music was playing. But when the record's finished, I'd start screaming the place down. And that led to the intervention of social services and a choice that my mother had to make as to whether to try and carry on the way that she was or whether to have me fostered. And she went for the latter.
Wow. That must have been hard and must have been huge to digest at that young age.
And I was not sort of aware of much of it at the time, but apparently I went through a number of foster homes until I was getting on for 1 year old, and then I ended up with one particular foster family who were Dutch people, Dutch parents, and I stayed with them for the first 6 years of my life. And that was a really nice, happy period. I didn't really know my birth parents at all, but my foster family were wonderful.
Wow. And did you jump from family to family over the duration of your life?
When I stayed with the Dutch family, I was there for the first 6 years, so that was quite stable. The big shock came when I was then returned to my birth parents, who I didn't know. And they didn't know me. And I think they had particular expectations of me. And I really didn't know them. So there was a bit of a mismatch. And that resulted in some difficulties between all of us, really.
What were those difficulties that impacted you?
Well, I hadn't really bonded with my parents because I didn't know who they were. And so at 6, I was just thrown into another family. And I missed who I perceived as being my real family, which was the Dutch foster family. And I didn't know who these people were. And there was a real cultural mismatch. My parents had come from Jamaica, and had a particular culture that they were born and brought up in. And I was born and brought up here, largely by a Dutch family. So I had a different cultural bringing and different cultural norms. And the two didn't quite fit together. So there was some friction on both sides. And I think my father, who was a particularly, how can I put it, very clever man, but really quite, how can I put it? He was quite angry at the way that he'd been treated when he came to this country. And he sort of took that out on other people, myself included.
Wow. And, our parents teach us something about us, and that is what ingrains us into the individual we are. But that must have been difficult juggling between two families.
I think I was quite lucky in that. I think there's a saying about give me a child until they're 7 or something, and I'll show you the man, something like that. And because the majority of my young life was with the foster family, I had the resilience to cope with what came next, which was quite difficult. However, on the other hand, I did pine for them awfully because I missed them. But then it was trying to juggle between the two, knowing that I had to please my birth parents, who had very high expectations, particularly academically and behaviorally. And I suppose my father in particular tried to mold me into what he thought I ought to be rather than what I was.
And was that stressful growing up?
It was very stressful growing up. I'd never been hit before, whereas his answer to things was often hitting. And that was both for myself and for my mother. And that was something I wasn't used to at all. And I had to try and get used to that to some extent, and cope with that for a number of years. But it was stressful period.
And in growing up into university, did that leave a mental and physical scar as your character in some way?
I think that probably started to come out in adolescence. So probably when I was I suppose I tried to please my parents and study hard and produce the results that they wanted. However, two things happened. One is that I took the 11 plus and failed, much to my father's abiding shame. And then I was sent away to boarding school, which I was grateful for on one hand, and yet being the only black kid in the boarding school, I encountered some racism, and that was difficult as well until I started to make friends, and that fell away somewhat. Then when I was in my early teens, I fulfilled some of my father's expectations by winning 3 prizes at the boarding school I was at. And then when I was about 14, 15, I went through the usual teenage angst. And I don't know why exactly. Well, to some extent, I used to ask questions in class, quite difficult questions, such as, why do I need to remember this? Why do I need to remember all these dates in history? Like, why did Henry VIII's fifth wife got a head chopped off? And what year was that?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand why I needed to memorize that or what use that would be to anybody. So I used to ask questions. And then I get put in detention for asking those kind of questions. And then around that period as well, my parents' marriage fell apart and I was put on antidepressants. Not sure I needed them, but I was put on them at the age of 15 and then kept on them for the next 45 years.
What? 45 years? What? That's crazy.
And this is where life is quite strange, where some things are a negative, which then can become a plus.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really disagree with putting youngsters on antidepressants and that kind of medication. And yet because of being put on those at that age, it made me start to think about why did that happen? And as a result of that, I ended up doing a psychology degree after I left school. still trying to work out why things happened, why I was like I was, why had I been put on the pills. And without going through that sort of turmoil, I would not be doing what I do now, which is, as far as possible, advocating holistic health and natural methods of healing. So what started out as something which looked very negative, many years later, has turned, certainly for myself, into a positive.
It just shows you that we can heal ourselves with the depth of knowledge that, something on that long can be healed.
It can. And the strange thing was that I was told I'd have to take these pills for the rest of my life. And also some other health issues I had. I had back problems as I got older, a slip disc, sciatica and arthritis. And I was given some very heavy-duty painkillers on top of the antidepressants. The painkillers included tramadol and gabapentin, very heavy-duty painkillers. Then I had a prostate issue, and I was given some more pills on top of those. And at one point, I said to the doctor, what happens when you mix those, and those together? They said, we don't know. And that, I think, is when the penny started to drop. And I thought, not enough work goes into looking at what things mix, whether they ought to mix, or what the impact of mixing all these different drugs are. Now, at the moment in the UK, I think there's a figure of about 50% of people aged over 65 who take 5 or more medicines a day. It's called polypharmacy. And when I think about what I went through, and I'm starting to think, what does the average person over 65 now go through on 5 different drugs a day? What is the effect of mixing all those together? And it's something that we just don't hear much about. But then when we look at, I don't know, statistics in this country, we are supposed to be one of the most technologically advanced societies. And yet at the moment, there are 2.8 getting on for 3 million people off sick. Now, the government's response, rather than thinking, what's going on here? What's the root cause of this? Why are so many people sick? The latest response is to cut benefits, which I think is a really bizarre response to this. And again, my whole thing is getting to the bottom of the root cause of the illness. Now, that's to do with individuals, but surely a government ought to be looking at why on earth nearly 3 million people are off sick and why 9 million people are on benefits. And that's the number that they want to cut, rather than thinking, what's the cause of this? What are most people off sick with? How did it start? What can we do to change it? Very strange way of looking at things, in my opinion.
It is strange. And someone that was one of those statistics, you found a way to be able to heal yourself. Tell us how you were able to make that change.
As I sort of got older, I went through life's usual ups and downs. I found myself homeless at one point. Then I was fortunate to meet some other homeless people and set up a short life housing co-op, which put a roof over our heads. But I was unemployed until one day I went to the Dole office to sign on, and they said, we've got a job for you. I said, what's that? And they said, this side of the counter, you start Monday. So I started my working life in the benefit office. And then I saw how that was set up. And again, that made me quite angry, because part of the role was to work out ways to deny people from having benefits. The system was so labyrinthine and complicated, it was very difficult for most people to work their way through it, let alone if you worked in it. Then I was quite fortunate in moving on from there to find a job advising homeless people, again, using my own experience of being homeless, to help them obtain a roof over their heads as well, before eventually getting a job with the local authority as a housing officer. Now, when I started that, I looked around again and thought, this system's, it's infuriating. It's not helping the people who it really ought to help. And some of the decisions that are being made, in my opinion, were not right. So I made it my ambition to get to the top of the greasy pole as fast as possible and change the system. Well, 8 years after starting as a housing officer, I found myself as a director of housing and working directly for politicians, and then realized that I'd been quite naive. It didn't really matter what position you were in as an officer, you worked for the politicians. And some of what you're required to do was either impossible and sometimes unethical. So that was a real eye-opener.
Incredible. It just shows you when you're in the system, this is how it works, and you realize, hey, I want to make change, but it can't happen. And that must have been hard to digest for you.
It was hard to digest, and it was something that never sat very well with me. But when you're in that position, you have a choice. You can either walk or carry on trying to change things. And even if you couldn't change the whole system, you might be able to make a few changes for individual families or households or people along the way. And so I stuck with that for as long as I could.
And when you stuck it for as long as you could, what did you do next?
Well, then I got called in one day. For about 4 years, whilst I was in that position, the council was hung, which meant that there was no overall control. So no political party was in power. It was split evenly between them. And so what happened was every day, somebody from one party would walk in, say the Labour Party, and say, right, if you don't prioritise our policies, we're going to sack you. Okay. 5 minutes later, the Tories might come in and say, if you don't prioritise our policies, don't tell me, you're going to sack me. Then a bit later, the Liberals might come in and say, if you don't prioritise, don't tell me, you're going to sack me. And I kept the plate spinning for 4 years until after an election, Labour took over overall control and they had a clear out of all those who they deemed to be unresponsive to prioritising their policies.
What was that stressful for you to take those 4 years?
That was stressful. It was also stressful when I got called in and told, basically, you're out. And that coincided with going through divorce, very difficult divorce, where I lost 90% of everything and had to start again at the same time as losing the job.
Wow, that wasn't hard to digest again, you know?
Yeah, the timing of all that was not great.
No. And did you end up back on the streets, Tony, or did you find a new source of life? Or tell us more.
I managed to get a roof back over my head, and I ended up working as a play care worker in a children's nursery for about a year and a half. And that was an interesting experience. I would take the older children to school every day after making them breakfast, and then come back and entertain the younger ones, playing games with them, cleaning up their mess. As I often say, a bit like working for politicians. And then going to pick the old ones up from school later, bring them back, make their tea, entertain them until the parents come and take them away. And there it was very clear and obvious how difficult it was for some parents, particularly single parents, trying to go to work, pick up the kids, rush home, get the kids ready for bed, look after themselves, take a bit of time for themselves, and then get up and do the same thing over and over, day after day. And sometimes you could see how this impacted the behavior of the kids. Not all of them, but some of them. And then you'd have to give them some extra attention to try and make them feel a bit more secure. After a while, I thought, well, I need to probably think of something else to do. And so I ended up doing consultancy work and interim management, going around the country, doing housing jobs, advising different politicians of different cities on their housing policies. And I did that for probably about 10 years or so before getting a permanent job back in London.
You know, you seem to be the man for the people in some way, Tony, the way you're describing it, you know.
It's just an interesting way that life, I don't know, I suppose creates pathways sometimes.
Yeah.
And I suppose what happens to us a lot when we're small is that we get indoctrinated into what kind of thing we ought to do. We should study very hard, get your exams, go to university, get a degree, start at the bottom of the pyramid, climb up the greasy pole, get to the top, get your gold clock and leave. And I suppose for many other previous generations, that's pretty much how it was. And then technology appeared and sort of industrial jobs started disappearing. More technical jobs came along, and a job for life was something that just didn't happen anymore. And so particularly now for youngsters, they're probably not going to stay in one career for long. They're going to be jumping around, retraining, doing different things, gig economy, working for themselves. It'll be a mixture of things, very different from how it used to be, particularly with many jobs that people are doing now probably disappearing and new ones appearing.
You have a holistic center. Tell us about how that came about, because you seem to be a very knowledgeable man in that department, you know.
That came about in response to the health issues that I had. Going back to that time when I said to the doctors, what happens when you mix all these together? They said, well, you know, you're going to have to be on these for the rest of your life. Now, at the time, fortunately, I had a coach who said, if you keep taking and mixing all these, the rest of your life is not going to be very long. He said, I want you to go and see a friend of mine who's a kinesiologist. Now, for those who are not familiar with what they do something called muscle testing, where they see if your body will respond to what is true. So what happened in my instance is this. I had to take all the 24 pills a day I was taking down to this chap, and he made me hold my arm out like this, and he tested my muscles against the frequency of the pills, and he said, your body doesn't want any of this stuff at all, and it's making you more sick. You need to stop. Now I said, oh, but the doctors told me I've got to take them forever. And he said, no, not a good idea. And don't do this at home, anybody, please. What happened is that he gave me some vitamins and minerals, and I just stopped taking the medication. Now, you can imagine I'd had 45 years of taking a mixture of medication every single day. To just stop, not a good idea. And I shook and sweated for about 2 months and felt very, very uncomfortable, to the point where I rang him back up and said, I can't hack this. I need to go back on the pills. And he said, no, go and get some colonic irrigation. Now, I went to see a lady who performed that function, and she said, have you ever tried bioresonance? Which I'd never heard of. Now, the colonic irrigation did its job by washing out all the chemicals quicker than might otherwise have happened, and saved me an awful lot of discomfort. I then went to go and see this chap who was a bioresonance practitioner. And I thought, how does this work? He sat me in a chair, he put some pads on me, and he plugged those pads into a device, which were tuned to a particular frequency for all my ailments, which covered my prostate, which covered my back, sciatica, slip disc, etc.
Wow.
And we started with the prostate. We started with that because I had ended up a little before going to see him, curled up on the floor, screaming, unable to wee. Now, if anybody's ever been in that position, if you just think what it's like and you're bursting to wee and you can't, nothing happens. So I got taken to hospital where they performed a procedure to enable me to wee. Very uncomfortable procedure, but I was so relieved to be able to wee in the end. And they said, looks like you have a prostate issue here. Don't know if it's cancerous. We'll book you in for some biopsies. And before the first biopsy, I went to see the bioresonance practitioner. I had about 3 sessions with him. Then I went for the first biopsy, which I found extremely unpleasant, excruciating, and never wanted to do another one again after that. I got called in by the consultant after that, and he said, look, I don't know what's happening. We don't know either way. I'm going to send you away, come back and have another biopsy in a few weeks. Worst nightmare. Particularly as you're lying there, or certainly I was, and there's a screen up in front of you and you can see what they're doing inside you, and it was not very pleasant. Anyway, I went away and had some more bioresonance sessions and then returned for another biopsy. I managed to get through that biopsy, and afterwards the consultant called me in and he said, look, the good news is you haven't got cancer and I'm discharging you. So that was a huge relief. I went back to the bioresonance practitioner and said, now can you sort out my back, slip disc, arthritis, and sciatica? He said, yeah, I think so. And he did. And so without pills, I had then been able to lose the pain, drop 2 stone, go back to the gym. I said, why don't people know about this? This is amazing. Now, we had moved all the way up north to invest in property, and I said, I don't want to do that anymore. Just get me one of these devices and teach me everything you know. So that was the start of it.
Wow. It's just shows you that you decide, hey, it heals me, it figures me out. Let's pack it up and do all this bioresidency stuff. And that was probably the beginning of your next chapter of, I'm going to help people get the education and experience and wellness to be able to heal themselves, right?
That was it, yes.
Wow. And how did that feel? Sorry, go ahead.
Then we went on one of these weekend courses run by somebody called Ryan Pinnock. And what he does is put people back in touch with their intuition. Sort of quite a spiritual kind of thing. Not religious, but spiritual. And while on this course, I met somebody who said, what do you do? And I said, well, not sure what I do at the moment. I explained my health issues and said, I've just got this device, not sure what to do with it. And she said, I have got a physiotherapy clinic in Wimbledon. I think that my clients would like what you do. Why don't you start up in my place 1 day a week? Now, we were in Halifax at the time and thought, okay, that sounds a good idea. Let's try that. So we started, and then COVID hit, and everything just went haywire for us as it did for everybody. So then that sort of came to a halt. And then in the shower one day, I started thinking about COVID, and I thought, what's that? It's respiratory. People can't breathe. They need oxygen. Got out of the shower, said to my wife, we're going to go and get an oxygen chamber. Now, she's used to me coming out with weird stuff. And she said, sure. I said, yeah, I'm sure. So off we went to all the way down to West Sussex, where they make these things. and tried it out. I said, okay, yeah, we'll have one of these. And then I saw something that looked a bit like a sunbed. I said, what's that? And he explained to me it was an infrared bed. And it gave different waves to the body, and it healed the body. Again, without pills, it helped reduce inflammation. I thought, if you use oxygen and that to reduce inflammation, that must help with quite a lot of chronic illnesses. So I said, okay, we'll have one of those and one of those. And right now my wife's looking at me and sort of, I'm going to kill you, you lunatic. And then we found some premises in Wimbledon and opened up. And what we do now is just help people who are in mental and physical pain to get better as far as possible without pills. And part of the journey, which I probably didn't mention, which was earlier, was that I had actually tried to commit suicide at one point. And this was Christmas Eve 2011, where another relationship had come to an end, and I was absolutely broke, and there was no food in the house. The bills had piled up, repossession notices, disconnection notices from the utilities. And at that point, I thought, I've hit a brick wall, no way out. But what I did have over the years was a stash of antidepressants, which I'd collected and stored. And so I took those with 2 bottles of cheap wine, which I had left, and took the lot. I woke up in hospital in a locked ward, sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And they would not let me out. And then they determined that my depression was so intransigent, it was so bad that drugs couldn't do it. So they were going to give me electroconvulsive therapy. For those who aren't aware of what that is, there's a film called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson, which shows what this procedure is about. You're strapped down, arms and legs, on a bed. A device is put round your tongue so you don't swallow it. Electrodes are attached to either side of your head, and then you're injected to sort of put you out a bit, and then boom, you're shocked a number of times with the current going through your head. Now, this is supposed to cure or alleviate depression. I'll be even-handed about this. Some people said, oh, well, yeah, it helped me a bit or whatever. Didn't help me at all. What it did do is destroy parts of my short-term memory. And so I have a particular view about it, which is that it's not a good thing. And it's something that used to happen a long time ago when they used to do lobotomies even, and they thought that was a good idea. So I have yet to be convinced by the science or anything else that electroconvulsive therapy is anything other than negative. They would not let me out of this place because I didn't have anyone who was my so-called responsible adult to look after me. Luckily, one day when I was a bit more lucid, sitting there on the ward, still doped up, I found a computer in the corner, booted it up, and started scrolling through Facebook. And luckily, I found the name of a friend who I recognized from school years ago, who I actually hadn't seen for 30 odd years. And I messaged him and said, long time no see, could you do me a favor and come and spring me from a mental hospital? And bless him, he and his wife drove all the way down from Warwickshire to Harrow in North London, the hospital I was in, and said, we are his responsible adults, now let him out. So just to go back to what we were saying at the beginning, Aron, I've had some really quite unpleasant things happen along the way. But
Mhm.
just as I've peered over the edge of the cliff, something or someone has pulled me back and changed my fortune each time. And that is something that I will be forever grateful for. And also, it just makes me more determined to help other people get well and stay well naturally.
Tony, and looking back at what makes you, strong now, the school of hard knocks to get you where you are, do you feel like it was part of your story to be able to help people where they are now?
Yeah, I think that's why it happened that way. And, more and more people I meet who had a similar journey now end up doing healing work or helping people in a way that they have learned from. So, be that in the field of health, education, finance, whatever,
Hmm.
it seems that a number of people had a similar kind of path. You go through the school of hard knocks for a reason. And that reason is A, to teach you some lessons so that you can learn some things, and then take what you learn and hopefully help others with it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And do you feel and understand your mission from God is to be here and to do what you need to do?
If you asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said, you're having a laugh, have another pint of lager. Now, I think, yes, it's quite probably that. Otherwise, I don't see how things would have panned out in the way that they have.
And I presume that's your legacy, to leave people happy, healthy lives.
That is certainly what I'd like to do. And it will go way on beyond my life as well when other people are doing something similar. But it's something that's so needed. At the moment, I think that our bodies are, and our minds actually, are sort of under assault from a number of different areas, from what's in the food chain, the way that food is produced. It's not done in the most healthy way. We need to move back to regenerative farming, where the soil is allowed to replenish itself rather than having all kinds of pesticides and things put onto it, which then impacts the stuff that's grown in it, and then we ingest that. And for people who eat meat, for instance, battery farming, squashing animals up together, makes them very ill.
Hmm.
But it's done to make more money. And so when they're all squashed up together, they are injected with antibiotics to stop them from getting all the diseases that they would get otherwise. And then what happens? People eat the animals, they eat the antibiotics. So that's taken in on top of the pesticides, which go onto the vegetables as well. Then the water is often not cleansed to the standard that it probably ought to be. And it's very difficult. I mean, there are lots of programs on. I think there was one last night actually about Thames water and the scandal of what happens to our water. So if our food's not great and our water's not great, what about the air? Well, the air obviously contains everything that's in the food and the water as well. And I suppose really until everything is cleaned up, it's going to be difficult. But what we can do is mitigate against some of the worst excesses of what's in the food and the water. So for instance, rather than just buying food that's wrapped up in plastic, we need to understand that plastic leaches into the food. And then if we eat the food that's got the plastic in it, the plastic is ingested, and over time that builds up inside us as well and doesn't do us any good. They're called forever chemicals. So we need to reduce the number of things that are wrapped in plastic, which we consume, and have things that are fresher so that they don't need to be transported halfway across the world. Now, this might be inconvenient because it might reduce the amount of choice of food that we have, but it's probably a healthier way to live. The other thing is that if we pick up a lot of food packets in the supermarket, have a look at the ingredients and see how many words you cannot pronounce with regard to what is inside the stuff that you're about to purchase. Those things are not meant for human consumption. They might preserve food for a long time, but it doesn't mean it's good for us. So there are quite simple things that we can do and need to start doing to preserve our health. The other thing is that as a society, we are over-medicalized. And in particular, that happens with children as well. So rather than taking lots and lots of pills from a very early age, we need to go back to Mother Nature. As a species, I think probably the further that we get from Mother Nature and try and outwit her by creating new compounds and chemicals, is the more damage we probably do to ourselves and to the earth. Others may beg to differ, but certainly from what I've seen, the nearer that we stay to natural, holistic living is the healthier that we will be. But that has to be weighed up against people's profits. And I think that's where we find ourselves as a species at the moment, at a crossroads.
Oh yeah, for sure. Tony, before we wrap up, is there any messages in your soul that you feel like you need to tell us, or messages that will leave us with, oh man, I got advice, I got impact, I understand where he's coming from? Because it sounds like you're a very deep soul who has deep experiences and is on a mission to change people's lives in some way.
I think the main thing is, although we were told not to, do your own research. Look at what's in the food chain. Look at how agriculture occurs now. And think back to, depending on how old you are, of course, how it used to be when you were a youngster. People my age, it's very different. If you're younger, it's not quite so. But do your own research. Look at what really is good for the body. If you go to the supermarket and you're trying to lose weight, it says, here's a low-fat version. No, that doesn't mean that it's healthy at all. The other thing is seed oils, which are sort of vegetable oils that we often use to fry food or to cook food with. They're not great for us. The old stuff, like dripping and tallow, those are the things that actually go with the body. They work with the body. Seed oils don't. They are manufactured and eventually create inflammation in the body, which then creates sickness. So please do your own research. I'll drop in a few tidbits here and there to try and help people stay healthy. But above all, try and stick to things as natural as possible. Even clothing. You know, we have Macintoshes which have waterproofing on them. Those waterproofs seep into us. We have, for instance, non-flammable pillows, bedclothes. All of those are chemicals which, again, get into us. Toiletries, perfumes, they all have chemicals which go right through our skin and into us and impact our endocrine systems and upset them, making us ill. So I suppose my abiding message is, please think about what you take in through your mouth, your ears, your eyes, and just try and stay as natural as possible.
Fabulous. Tony, where can people find you to learn more and to experience your experiences?
You can find us at Total Body Health Limited, Total Body Health Wimbledon. We have a website, www.total-body-health.com. And on there, you'll see some videos, you'll see some blogs, and what we do to try and help people remain and stay healthy.
And I think he even provides once a month or once a week walks, or everyone walks and they get to shoot the breeze and share their opinions, ideas, and thoughts, right?
We do. In Wimbledon, we have something called the Walk and Talk. Every Saturday morning, a group of people who live locally gather and walk for between 1 and 2 hours and just talk. Now, on those walks, some people say, do you know, this is the most I've spoken to somebody all week. And what you've raised there, Aron, is a very important point. Loneliness is one of the biggest killers out there at the moment. And when people are stuck at home on their own, without friendship, without companionship, it's very difficult. Now, on these walk and talks, you can meet anybody whatsoever and get chatting about anything whatsoever. And it's a way, A, to get to know your neighbours, B, to explain what your views are on life in general, and listen to others as well. And for some people, that's a massive, massive plus. For someone who's been at home all week on their own, it's great for them to be able to get out and shoot the breeze with you, tell you what's on their minds. It's wonderful. And again, costs nothing, and it's natural.
Tony, I want to say thank you so much for what you do and being on the show to share the true essence that you are, man. It's a blessing.
Thank you, Aron.
There you go, everyone. Another incredible superstar soul changing the world in their unique, special way through their own unique school of hard knocks. And it just shows you our health is our wealth, and how you want to invest in your health is how you live your wealth. So stay tuned next Tuesday at 4 p.m. UK time, 11 Eastern Standard Time, where we talk to an incredible legend who's forging the incredible life that they are. So take care, and remember, you're a rock star.
Thank you for listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show, where the world's best stories are told. If you like, please post a review or subscribe to the show. To find out more, contact us at aronodowd.com. That's ARONODOWD.com. We're always ready to share another magnificent tale from the world's best storytellers. So stay tuned and rock on.